And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Kate Dolan. She is a writer and director whose short films have premiered at festivals like BFI London Film Festival, Fantastic Fest, and Fantasia Film Festival. Her debut feature film, You Are Not My Mother, premiered at TIFF Midnight Madness in September 2021 and is now available to watch on VOD. Hi, Kate. We're so excited you're here.
We are.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I'm a big fan of the podcast, so I'm very happy to be here and involved. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So cool.
So can you take us back to the beginning? How did you get introduced to horror?
I think I always try to because I was doing a lot of press for the movie lately, and a lot of people asked me that, and I was like kind of trying to work it out. I think I always had a real natural fascination with kind of anything spooky or scary. I think Halloween was my favorite time of year and dressing up for that. And then I started to realize there was Goosebumps books in the school library, and I think they were real gateway because it was kind of, the movies were maybe a bit too scary to watch when you're 6 or 7, but the Goosebumps books, they're more accessible and you can get them at the library and enjoy them, and they're not kind of as scary maybe. So I think that was kind of the gateway. And then I kind of really started to annoy my mom about wanting to watch horror movies, I think. And she was just eventually gave up and kind of just let me start watching them.
Was your mom or any member of your family into horror at all?
Not really. I mean, my mom, she's a big cinephile. She loved watching films. So I watched Shawshank Redemption with her when I was 7. And, I think I actually have a real early memory, I think, of watching that movie Alive with her about the rugby team that ate each other on the mountain.
Yes.
And Braveheart, I watched, I watched Braveheart with her too, which isn't a horror movie, but there's people being murdered and stuff in it.
It's kind of heavy.
Pretty gruesome.
Yeah.
He has his intestines getting pulled out of his body at one point. So.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, so I think my mom had I let me watch these movies with her because I would never go to bed because I was an only child, so I hated being put to bed. So she just kind of gave up and let me watch them with her. So I think even though those weren't horror movies, she definitely liked kind of, films like that, I suppose, that were horror adjacent. She's not really a horror fan though, but I didn't really have anyone. My auntie on my dad's side, she was only 15 when I was born. So she used to watch a lot of she still loves horror movies a lot. So she used to kind of try and show me stuff that she took me to see 28 Days Later in the cinema when I was 11. So that was fun.
My aunt was 9 when I was born, so I have a similar experience where she would watch scary movies, and I would when she'd babysit, and I would sneak, or she would take me to see The Village, and they should to see The Village in theaters. So it's the best.
Yeah, you need someone to kind of bring you to see. I'm doing that now for my little cousin because my uncle has a daughter. She's only 10, and she watched my movie for the first time last week. That was her first big scary movie to watch, and she was delighted. Yeah,
that's really sweet.
Wait, that's so cool.
Yeah, It was so cute. She was like, "Does this mean I'm graduated to watching scary movies now? If I can watch your movie?" And I was like, "Yeah, definitely." And her mom was like, "Don't encourage this."
Have you heard of the new French extremity movement? Let's start it.
Yeah.
Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Yes. I feel like she'd like it.
So, do you remember your first horror movie? What your first horror movie was?
Yeah, I was trying to figure this out. I think there was when I got to about age 8 or 9, I kind of got really obsessed with the idea of watching horror movies, and I had 2 best friends, and they had actually, their dad was minding them. They were having a sleepover together without me. I know I wasn't invited. I can't believe it, but they basically, their dad or one of their dads showed them the Omen.
Okay.
And they got to the part where the nanny jumps out the window, and they had to turn it off. But then they started telling me about that, and in school and stuff. So then we got obsessed with the idea of watching horror movies. So I think there was a few kind of together at sleepovers and stuff that we watched. It was definitely I think The Sixth Sense was definitely one of the first ones. And then maybe it was the Omen, and then I think the Blair Witch Project was probably one of the first ones as well. And the Ring, the Ring was, and Psycho. I think Psycho I watched with my granny as well, so I think that was kind of like a little bit of a gateway into, because that's not too scary. But,
I like the range, the decades you have. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was like good education to start with. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
But I love the experience of in like elementary school and middle school where you would see a horror movie and everyone would tell everyone like the plot, and you'd be like, oh, I have to watch this, or I can't watch it, because like that happened with The Ring for me, because I was too scared to watch it. And so my friend like told me the whole plot, and I just remember that being like a weird fun part of childhood, is like talking about the scary movies you saw and telling everyone the story.
I know, like I loved, like I remember once there was like this kind of slightly older girl who like our grandmothers lived next door to each other, so she used to watch movies and tell me the whole plot, like literally from like the beginning to the end, like every line described. But I remember she told me, she was like, I watched this movie with sharks called Deep Blue Sea and it's like really scary, and she like told me the whole plot, and I was like gripped. I was like, I need to watch this movie. It sounds like the most amazing movie I've ever heard of in my life. It was so funny.
Oh, Deep Blue Sea.
I love that movie.
Yeah, when the sharks swim backwards, you're like, oh my God.
My favorite part is where he uses the doctor in the gurney and throws it against the glass to break the glass of the facility. Favorite part of the movie. It's so ridiculous. He's like,
that movie's incredible.
As he goes slamming into the glass.
So good.
Oh, man.
So good.
Okay, so aside from the movie that we're going to talk about a little bit later, do you remember any other films that like really scared you or like stuck with you as a kid?
You know, I'm obviously from Ireland, and I think here, obviously, everyone's basically Irish Catholic. So it's like the kind of scariest thing is always the devil, with like the idea of like the devil or demons. So I think like The Exorcist really scared me when I saw that, because I obviously, as a like God-fearing Catholic child, was like, I'm going to get possessed by a demon now. And I was like terrified of being possessed by a demon. And like I would say prayers being like, please don't let a demon possess me. Like, so scared of this idea. So I think that one like really scared me a lot. And then, yeah, I think that a lot of the other movies that we watched then, I think were a lot of those kind of like, I suppose 90s slasher type movies, like Urban Legend and Valentine and stuff like that. So they didn't scare me. They're kind of more fun. But I think, definitely The Exorcist kind of stuck with me for a good few years. And then even like I remember like even when I was 15, I went to see The Exorcism of Emily Rose at the cinema with some friends. And that still innate fear of like, I'm going to get possessed by a demon. Like it was still in my mind at age 15. I was like, no, it's going to happen someday. And I'd be like in bed at night and I'd be like, tonight's I'm going to be possessed by a demon. It's like, so scared.
I was similar because I also grew up Irish Catholic, obviously not in Ireland, but my dad, I've said this a couple times in the podcast, my dad was like super scared of demons. And like I was then super scared of demons. And I'd be like, I have to do everything in my power to never get possessed. So like I took the don't say the name of a demon very seriously. Like it was just like I am not super religious, like, and I haven't super been, but that was something I'm like, I don't want to play games. Like even if it's not real, I don't want to find out if it is. So I'm just gonna follow the rules and make sure.
Yeah, I think it's like that. I think it was the fact that like, you know, my mom, she's really like, you know, she's not super religious or anything like that, but like we lived with my grandmother for a while when I was growing up. My grandparents were really religious. They took me to mass every Sunday. They truly believed like the devil's real. And my mom, even though she was like very well educated and like, you know, very kind of level-headed woman, she was like fully believe the devil's real. Because like it's so ingrained from like going to church that you're just like, oh no, this is true. So then like when you're a kid and you're like, they're like, no, the devil is real. You're like watching those movies, you're like, whoa, okay. This is real, guys. This is going to actually happen. So yeah, that there's no adult to tell you like, no, yeah, you shouldn't be afraid of that. That's not real. Because they're like, it might be. And you're like, oh no.
Did you get scared a lot watching horror movies as a kid? Or was it just specific ones that really scared you? Or were you like, you know, a scaredy cat as a kid or?
Not really. I think I like, I was generally like pretty hardy with scary movies. I was always the kind of kid who got in trouble at birthday parties and sleepovers because I would always bring like horror movies, and then the moms would be like ringing my mom and they'd be like, there's 3 girls here crying because Kate brought like The Ring. And my mom would be like, oh God, here we go again. So yeah, I was like wanting to push myself further all the time. I was like, I want to see a scarier movie. So I was like, I kind of was always trying to up the ante on myself. Yeah.
Is that the way you are as an adult too? Just are you still trying to seek that high, or
yeah, I guess it's
that you had as a kid?
Yeah, I think like maybe making the horror movies is like, because I do find it really hard to find stuff that actually like scares me. So then I'm like, well, I'll just make them. I'll just like be involved in the process. I'll scare other people. So yeah, I guess I haven't. Yeah, it's kind of hasn't been a film in a long time. I think that's actually scared me. So yeah, I was like, yeah, I mean, you're probably the same. It's like you just watch constantly all the horror movies that come out. So you're like looking for something that's gonna like really kind of grip you.
We're pretty desensitized, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You said it's been a long time since you've seen a movie that scared you. Do you remember like the last movie that you saw as an adult, or a movie that you saw as an adult that was like, wow, this movie is terrifying?
Yeah, I think like one movie that really like affected me. I don't know if it like scared me so much, like, you know, jump scare or something like that, but I think afterwards I felt really unsettled by Lake Mungo. I think that was like the last time that I like really kind of felt really weird after watching a movie. I was like, oh, that made me feel kind of haunted. I was like kind of scary in that way.
Ugh, that's like my favorite, one of my favorite movies of all time. I watched that and had to sleep with the lights on the first time I saw it. It was like, oh, just something about it feels a little cursed.
Yeah, it feels like you shouldn't be watching it. It's like kind of makes you feel disturbed in a way that I hadn't really experienced with a film in a really long time. Yeah.
Terry, have you seen Lake Mungo?
I have.
Oh.
I don't remember too much.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you didn't like it. I was like, we have to quit the podcast.
I don't.
That's it. It's over.
I don't remember really getting it when I first saw it. Like thinking like, okay, what was the thing? What was the big thing about this movie? Because like people had hyped it up, but I want to rewatch it because like I don't remember anything about it.
I'll watch it with you. I'll watch it with you.
Yeah, I think definitely give it a rewatch. See if you've changed your opinion.
Because a lot of people say that about it, and I feel like I was either not paying attention, or I just missed something, or I just wasn't in the mood for more cerebral.
It's also like it's a little bit more subtle than a lot of stuff, and it's like very emotional, and it's got a lot of cool twists and turns. That I don't know. I just love that.
Yeah, I think I actually like almost started crying when I was watching it at one point because I was like, "This is such a sad movie," and I think that's almost partly why it like stayed with me after, because I was just like, "God, that's so sad and scary," and it made me feel bad feelings in a good way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Love it. And then so, you make horror movies, you watch horror movies. What attracts you to the genre now as an adult?
Obviously your perception of it all changes, I think, when you start like working to make horror films as well, maybe because you kind of maybe takes the magic out of it a little bit, because you kind of are looking at, when I watch horror movies now, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting how they like constructed that sequence that was scary, and how did they put that together, the music cues and all that kind of stuff. So you kind of start deconstructing them a bit in your head when you watch them. So it is nice to find a film that takes you out of that you're not thinking about that while you're watching it. And it does make you feel kind of unsettled. But I think it definitely, like, I think I love the genre as a filmmaker, because I think it's so, you can really let your imagination run wild, and you can kind of have a lot of fun and creativity in what you do. And you can kind of create monsters and strange and unusual things, and that you wouldn't get to do in kind of another genre of film. But yeah, I think it's just, I think as well, like, I think what appealed to me as a kid, and it still appeals to me now, is like that idea that a film could make you feel such an intense emotion. Like, it's like just so, like, it's like the same feeling as being on a roller coaster or like on a thrill ride. It's like you're kind of, your heart's racing, and you like are, you can't look away, but you want to. Like, I think that's like, in other genres of film, I don't think you have such a strong visceral reaction to like genres and like drama or film, or even a comedy film or whatever. But so I like that about it.
Cool.
Hell yeah. When did you kind of get the filmmaking bug? Is it something that you've always been interested in from being a child, or how did you get involved in filmmaking?
Yeah, I think as I said, I think my mother and my grandmother were very big into film, and like my grandmother particularly, she had a really like encyclopedic knowledge of old Hollywood and actors and movies, and like I watched Gone with the Wind with her, and like Rebecca, and like all these kind of like Hitchcock movies, and like so I think that gave me a very great love of the genre, like of film, and just like that way of storytelling, and like really kind of gripped me as a kid. I loved watching movies then, and like then I started reading like Empire magazine when I was kind of a little bit older then, and then seeing how films were put together and like how that all worked, and that just became obsessed. I made my communion and my confirmation, which are like sacraments in like Catholic church that you do when you're like 8 and 11, but like in Ireland you get given loads of money when you're doing those.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you get given money by like literally everybody, like your neighbors, your family, your parents, friends, all this kind of stuff.
Where the fuck was that when I had to go through that? Where was that for me?
You missed out. You missed out.
Damn it.
But I was like, so I saved up all my money. My mum made me put it in like a little post office account. But then when I got to like age 11, 12, after I'd done my confirmation, I was like, I want to buy a camera with the money. And my mom was like, please don't buy a camera. Like, just save it for something better than that. And I was like, no, I really want this. So she like brought me into the like, Best Buy type shop we have here. And I got a high-8 camera, and I was so delighted with myself. So then I started making like little movies with my friends. But I used all the money that I'd gotten for my communion confirmation. My mom was like, great. Fantastic.
Obviously, it was a good investment.
I know.
In the
It's
long
paying
run.
off. Yeah, it's paying off now. She's like, my mom's like, at first she was like, please just maybe do a degree, like law or something like that before you do film, like try it out. And I was like, no. And then I went to film school. But now I think she's like, she was kind of worried I'd never work. But now she sees that it's kind of paying off. So she's happy. She's happy now.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
see why this is why I bought my camera when I was 11 or 12 years old. See?
It was worth it. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Catholic Church, I guess.
Yeah, in a weird way.
In a weird way. Oh, just because of the weird traditions that the Catholic Church puts us through.
I know, yeah.
But, okay, so your feature film debut, You Are Not My Mother. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about it if they're unfamiliar?
Yes, of course. So it's a horror movie, and it's about a teenage girl called Shar, and she lives with her mother and her grandmother, and her mother is sort of suffering silently with her, like, some mental health issues, and then one day her mom goes missing, and the family sort of fear the worst, but then she kind of returns a day later, and her behavior becomes increasingly strange and unusual, and the protagonist starts to kind of unearth family secrets that have been kept from her and that kind of explain what's happening. And it's set during Halloween in Ireland, which is lots of fun because you haven't really seen Irish Halloween very much depicted on screen, so that's fun. But it's a scary kind of emotional movie, and it's available to rent now. So
you were talking about how you lived with your grandparents, with your mom. So I can see kind of how that translates into the film, because Shar and her mom live with their grandmother. Is that kind of where you got the inspiration for that kind of matriarchal system in their house? Yeah, it was a few things kind of. So, obviously, that was my upbringing as a kid. We lived with my grandmother and my grandfather. And so my grandmother, like, I spent a lot of time with her because my mom worked. So we would like kind of hang out together all the time. But it also was like, I always like that kind of like the 3 generations of women, because in like pagan, there's like a lot of, it's, the film's kind of like folk horror, and there's like draws from paganism in Ireland and like witchcraft in Ireland that I did some research on, and the kind of folklore of Ireland. But in paganism, there's like this 3 goddess symbol, which is the maiden, the mother, and the crone. So it's like 3 kind of times of a woman's life. So it was like that was part of the inspiration for like the 3 women as well. For me, it was like the film is sort of it's about a lot of things, but I think for me, like in Irish history,
in an Irish society, like women obviously have been treated really badly, and like the impacts of that, you see it kind of generationally, how the different generations deal with that, and like the Catholic Church kind of oppressing women throughout Irish history. And for me, the film is, I guess, about like traumatic events in the past and how 3 generations of women deal with that. So like you have the grandmother who, like, it's like that generation was kind of like, keep it secret, never say anything, don't talk about it. Whereas the mother then is kind of getting the impact of keeping the secrets and can't do it anymore. And then it's like the younger generations, like, we try to, like, you know, my generation, now we're trying to like draw things out into the light and like make sure that like we confront things that are in the past, which are used to be kind of swept under the rug. So yeah, that's kind of partly what the film's about too.
Cool.
So you brought up the folklore and the folk horror aspect of the movie. So from an outsider's perspective, it seems as if folklore is really kind of intrinsic to Ireland. Is that a fair statement?
Definitely, yeah. I think, you know, like I was saying about kind of the way that, you know, as a kid, I was kind of like told like the devil's real, and it's like, you know, that kind of the Catholic side of it. But then there's like, we had this very like religious kind of side to our history, but then there's a real still a feeling of the pagan and like the kind of folklore always ever present as well, which is really interesting. So like we were always told the folklore stories like about banshees and stuff like they're real. Do you know what I mean? It's like, no, this and like if you talk to some people from like, you know, as you know, Dublin is kind of, obviously it's capital city, so like there's maybe a bit of less belief, but if you go going more rural, there's people who will straight up be like, no, my mother saw a banshee. Like they will truly still believe that it's real. So it's like, it kind of, it's funny. It's like this kind of like, it's all believed still a little bit. And like in history, there's like been cases of like people really believing it's true. There used to be fairy doctors in Ireland that like, if you thought there was like a fairy malady that your family member was having, you would call them and they'd like they were kind of like herbalists and stuff like that, but they would help you in whatever way they thought was fit.
Well, and part of this movie is based on a real case, right? About a man who thought his wife was a changeling, correct? And
yes, yeah.
So that actually happened. Yeah.
So this guy, basically this woman was called Bridget Cleary, and it was in 1895, so it wasn't like that long ago. And that was kind of the last recorded case of a changeling, or like, you know, a real changeling, I don't know. But basically he thought his wife was unwell and like called a fairy doctor to their house, and like the fairy doctor was like, we think that she's a changeling. And then that ended very tragically with her husband burning her in a fire in their house, and he got sent to prison for murder. But
Jesus,
yeah. So that was like, I always find those stories really interesting because you're like, what is real? Like, did he really believe that, or what was really going on there? Do you know, like you're kind of, it's really intriguing just to think of like the real world impact of those stories that were kind of just stories, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I was also thinking, watching this movie, about how, like, because we've also been on our little mini-sode that we release every Fridays, we've been talking folklore, and we've been exploring folklore across the world. And what I always see in a lot of these movies, and in particular, I'm thinking about movies in Ireland that have changelings in them, like, is it The Hallow, I think I saw at one point, where it's like people typically go into the forest or a rural area and discover something that they're not prepared for, whereas this is set in Dublin, and it's more of less of a rural setting, and it's more of you know, like a city setting, and you don't have that aspect of it. And I thought that was really fascinating that here we're not seeing people kind of verge out into territory unknown. It's like it's still here within that cityscape.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, for me, when I'm from like just outside the city centre of Dublin. That's where I grew up. So my kind of experience of hearing folk stories was very much in the urban. So you still would hear these things and believe they were real, but you had it in a very urban setting. So I really wanted to make something that, yeah, I suppose depicted folk horror in like my kind of experience of the folk aspect of my life. And then, you know, I think as well, it's just so scary to me, like the idea that you can be kind of suffering in a house or something bad can be happening there, and you're surrounded by neighbors, like literally in a terraced house where you've got like people on the other side of the wall, but you're kind of so isolated still even there. And like, that's almost scarier to me than like being in a cabin in the woods because you're just like around all these people that aren't intervening or helping you. So that's kind of more frightening.
Wow. Huh. Yeah.
So I love Hazel Dupe as Shar. She is incredible in this movie. But you have Shar become kind of friends with one of her bullies, and
Yeah.
I got a little queer reading from that. Is that me just being gay and liking to think things are gay, or did you mean to have kind of these queer undertones with their relationship as it kind of develops?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean,
Cool.
I'm queer, so I'm I feel like the film has a very like queer undercurrent. I think a lot of gay people I talk to who've watched it are like really pick up on it a lot, whereas like some straight people don't, but a lot of people do. So it's kind of nice that it's come across. But it was funny because when I was writing the script, I didn't really intend that, and then as I was writing the characters, I remember having a meeting with the script editor, and she was like, "What's going on with these girls?" I was like, "What do you mean?"
Just
She was
friends.
like, "Yeah, they're just gal pals chatting." But yeah, so then I was like, "Oh, I never really thought about that about their characters." And then the script editor was like, "Well, just kind of as you're writing the next draft, bear that in mind. Like, how would that impact how they interact with the world around them?" So then it became more the DNA of the characters, and then Hazel and Jordan, who plays Suzanne in the movie, when they read the script first, and I did a Zoom call with them, we couldn't meet in person because it was COVID, but it was like both of them separately on the Zoom calls were like, "What's going on with these girls, huh?" Because they're both queer, so they were kind of really picking up on it.
The
so
movie's
then I
so
was-
gay.
Oh, that's awesome.
I love it so much.
Yeah.
Oh, it's incredible.
I know, yeah. And we had a lot of like queer crew and stuff like that. So that was fun. But yeah, they really picked up on it, and they loved that idea about their characters. Then like any scenes they had together, that kind of just really naturally started to come in because they were obviously just like thinking about that all the time. So yeah, it was definitely intentional. But I like it's like not too overt, because I think, you know, it wouldn't be true to their characters to like kind of push it further, because I think both of them are very in a place and an environment that like it's not really safe for them to do that. So they kind of, you know, yeah.
So, okay, we've talked about your horror history, we've talked about your creative work, but Kate, what film did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
So, yes, I decided to bring The Omen today. Speaking of all my weird Catholic upbringing.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was like, I wonder if she's Irish Catholic, because I have so many questions about. But anyway, this is The Omen, 1976, the OG. So this is an incredible synopsis that we got from IMDb, Terry. It's very dramatic.
IMDb.
Mysterious deaths surround an American ambassador. Could the child that he is raising actually be the Antichrist, the devil's own son? That's the synopsis. I love that.
I love whoever writes the synopses for IMDb. They sometimes just are perfect.
Like, yeah, we could write our own, but sometimes even funnier when you use the IMDb, because it's like, that's weird that that's what you picked up from that movie, but okay.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
But to start out, can you give us your Scarred for Life story with The Omen and why you picked this to talk about today?
Yeah, so essentially I had these two best friends that I was, we used to kind of talk about horror movies. We were kind of all obsessed with the idea of watching them. And they got shown The Omen by one of their dads showed it to them when they were probably way too young. I think they were like 8 or something like that. And they had to turn it off after the scene where the nanny like jumps out the window. So they were telling me about this, and they used to do the quote where they'd be like, "It's all for you, Damien."
It's all for you,
It's all
Damien.
for you. I'm gonna sing that too much today, just so you are aware.
Stunning. Love it. But they, like, we knew the quote before I'd actually even seen the movie. And we used to do the nanny, like, jumping and stuff like that. It was, like, really weird. But, so then they kind of, like, I got obsessed then with the idea of, like, watching this, because they had only watched a bit of it too, I think. And then, so then I think it was, like, I can't remember the exact time, but I think it was most likely in one of, I think, my friend Evelyn, her house was kind of the place where you got to watch horror movies a bit more. So we were at her house, like, probably for a sleepover or birthday party or something like that, and we watched The Omen. And I just was so thrilled by it. I was just like, this is so badass. There's just like so much crazy stuff going on. And like, it's kind of a little bit camp as well, I think, like, you know, just like so kind of like theatrical, some of it, like the like evil nanny and like the close-ups of her eyes and stuff like that. And you're like, ooh. So I think it just really stuck with me. And I think as a like young Catholic kid, I think those like religious horror movies definitely scared me more than other kinds of horror movies. So I was really scared of the devil. So then I remember after I watched it, I really kind of was worried that by watching it, I would get the devil like attention. So then I kind of was a bit freaked out after that. I was like, oh God, no, I watched the movie now. He's going to definitely pay more interest in me because I've seen that movie. And then obviously there was all the stuff like that happened. It was like cursed movie. And then we started to like my friends, we would talk about that and you'd be like, no, you know what happened to like all the crew or like what happened on set. And then you'd be like, oh my God, I watched this movie and now I'm like going to bring the curse upon myself or something.
I'm sorry, how old were you when you finally saw it?
I was trying to work this out. I feel like 9 or 10.
9?
Maybe.
Did because there's, you know, it's kind of a quiet film overall, but like, I mean, not the music, but like in terms of the like horror aspects, they come at specific times. Did the violence at all terrify you when you were a kid, or do you remember that sticking with you at all?
I think the kind of the nanny scene I think really stuck with me because I think that's quite a disturbing thing to see as a kid because you're like, she basically like commits suicide and in it, and like that's really kind of frightening. I think as well the monkeys at the zoo, that sequence where they're driving in the zoo and then the monkeys start attacking the car, like a few sequences like that, just like really stuck with me. I think they're like, as you say, it's quite slow, like, you know, there's not that much happening all the time, and like, but when they do have those scenes, they're like, and obviously they amp up the like score so much, and it's like this like dramatic choral like singing, and you're like, oh no, something really bad's gonna happen here. Yeah.
We'll jump ahead. I just want to talk about the curse part. I know that, Terry, did you do some research about it being cursed? Because I feel like every movie about the devil is cursed. You know what I mean? I feel like The Exorcist was cursed. Like, some people died. And I'm always like, look, I'm a grown woman. I don't believe in that stuff, but maybe a little bit. Because I'm just like, that's too much of a coincidence. I don't know. It's the Catholicism. I swear to God, it ingrains itself in your brain no matter how hard you try to avoid it.
I know. It's funny. I was at a film festival recently and Paco Plaza was there with his movie Abuela. And we started, we were sitting at dinner together and we started chatting about, because he has a Catholic upbringing in Spain as well, like Spanish, very kind of strong Catholic upbringing. And like, obviously he has a lot of movies where they're like nuns and all that kind of stuff. And we were talking about that and we were like, we're obviously both atheists, horror movie directors, but he was like, sometimes I still pray if I'm getting nervous about something. And I was like, yeah, me too, secretly. Because I just like, it never leaves you this idea. You're like, well, because, you know, it's so ingrained in you when you're a kid, like mass every Sunday, all the schools in Ireland or almost all of them, like 95% of all schools in Ireland are Catholic. So you're doing prayers every day. You're learning about religion all the time. So it's hard to shake it off. Yeah, kind of still nuggets of it are there. So definitely the curse. I'm still like, I mean, bad stuff always happens on movies. Like they're very dramatic places where bad things happen. And, you know, you've got a lot of people working. Chances are something bad might happen to one person in their life after they finished making a movie. But it's like, when it's about the devil, it's like, that is why.
Right. Yeah, I remember that. There was like an interview, I can't remember who was with, maybe it was with IndieWire or Slash Film. I can't remember which one, but I was reading it and it was an interview with Seltzer, the writer of the film. And because his plane got struck by lightning and he's like, they asked him about the cursed aspect of the film. And he's like, it's just all hogwash. He's like, yeah, lightning struck my plane. Lightning strikes planes all the time.
Well,
like,
but
it's the fact that it's
Gregory Peck's airplane was also struck by lightning before, and apparently the flight he was supposed to take to set got like canceled or something, and the plane he was supposed to get on and he didn't get on, crashed, and killed everyone on board. So, again, all coincidences, but it's just like, it's just weird. You know what I mean? Like, obviously we can read into that, and like, life is just weird and planes crash, but it's just like, ooh.
Yeah, like, I mean, as a horror filmmaker, I think the, like, young Catholic kid in me would be too scared to make a film about the devil. I'm just going to say that.
Fair enough. Yeah. But, so, okay. I've seen both this and the remake from 2006. And I saw the remake from 2006 first because my dad took me to see it. I was 13. And it was like, it came out on 666. And it was just like all of this, like,
oh, I remember,
June 6, 2006. And I was like convinced it was the end of the world too. Because I was like, I was so anxious. And I was like, well, I guess we're going to go see this. And we saw it on 666. So I was already just like terrified.
Yeah.
I liked the remake, but I hadn't seen the original. It's a shot-for-shot remake, which is annoying. But watching this now, and I've seen the 1976 version before, but when I was younger, I didn't have an appreciation for, like, older horror. But watching it this time, this movie is so fucked up from the very beginning. You know what I mean? It's just like, husband tricks wife with baby that is hers. And just from the get-go, you're like, ooh, this is something weird and taboo about everything going on in this movie.
Yeah, very Catholic start to the movie, like, trick women, give them babies that aren't theirs. Right. Like, from the get-go, they're like, we're Catholic, here we go, let's do it.
Coincidence that the baby was born at the same time, and the mother, and obviously that all kind of like
resembles the baby,
unravels, but it's just like,
well, we've seen a lot of, as we've been doing this podcast and, you know, watching movies for both the main episode and also the smaller episodes, we've seen a lot of movies from the 70s, and the kind of men not believing women was such a thing that was happening in the 70s. And it's interesting because, like, we've seen a lot of that kind of cinema come back into popularity when Trump became the president, where it's like a lot of horror was about the woman that was either being considered hysterical or not being trusted or didn't have anyone to turn to because no one would believe her because she was a woman. And we see that in this movie too, where she's like, there's something wrong with this kid. She doesn't quite know why she's feeling this way, and she kind of internalizes it. But it's definitely the man's like at the beginning, she's never going to be able to live this down if that the baby's dead. Like, it's going to destroy her. So I got to lie to her and get her another baby. Like, it's from the very beginning. It's ingrained in that DNA of this film.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think so. It's brilliant. Like, I feel like there's, as you say, there's so many films of that era that, like, another favorite movie of mine, despite the director who made it, but is Rosemary's Baby. And I think that as well, like, it's such a brilliant movie about kind of just like gaslighting women and male kind of, you know, I love the book Rosemary's Baby actually as well, because that's like, I feel like it's just such a brilliant kind of take on that. And I think, the Omen definitely comes into that category too, of just like, well, don't lie to your wife and give her a mystery baby, because look what happens.
This priest has a spare baby. Like, that's not weird to you, but whatever. I mean, it's the 70s. I don't know.
Yeah, you're really trying to push this baby on me. Like, why are you trying to get rid of it? What's going on here?
Yeah, like, what's wrong with the baby?
Yeah. Oh, God.
Oh, but, like, this movie, like, the nanny jumping off of the building and crashing into the window. I looked at the timestamp, 13 minutes in. So, like, we are, like, off to the races with this movie. Like, we are ready to go, because it, like, very quickly establishes in, like, this pretty score and, like, cute photos. Like, look, they're a happy family. Like, the sweet, beautiful family. They're having a great time. And then I just love at the 6th birthday party, which is absolutely hysterical that this party has, like, a like, such... Was it the journalist was like, it's like the second coming of Christ or something, and I was like,
yes.
But just like this, such a cute birthday party, and then all of a sudden you have this woman just being like, it's all for you, Damien, and just absolutely, it's not even the most graphic death in this movie, but it's like the most fucked up in a way, because it's in front of all these kids, and everyone's just like, something's up here.
Yeah.
Ugh.
It's like the way she says it as well. Like, it's just so, there's something so haunting about that scene where she's just like, it's all for you, Damien. And it's like, you know, and I think the way they edit that part as well. Like it's just so well. I rewatched it before with this podcast, but with my two friends that I watched it with the first time when we were kids. It's still like it's so it's just so disturbing, and in a way that, like, as you say, like there's definitely more graphic deaths, but it's just something. I think, like, obviously suicide is always like a really kind of disturbing thing to see as a human or hear about, or so I think when you like see that depicted in a movie, it's very confronting, and like particularly how she does it and her kind of mannerisms about it and how they kind of edit that sequence together. There's real kind of build of tension at the party that you feel like, oh no, there's a dog there watching and stuff like that, and you're like, oh, what's going on?
Well, and it gives you that weird feeling because she's staring at the Rottweiler and then she commits suicide, but it's like, this is weird, but if she's under the influence of Satan, is it technically suicide? Like, it's just like this weird thing where you're like, she commits, like, she obviously hangs herself, but then you're like, this is very strange because obviously she's the dog, the creepy Rottweiler that just like lingers on the periphery for a while. Ugh. And then Damien waves at the dog when he's being held, and he's like,
I know,
hello. But, like, you think it's kind of cute at first, but then you know it's not, because it's just, like, a little, that kid is so creepy.
He's right, yeah, the kid is brilliant. I think, like, he really kind of, I don't know how they got, like, the performance, like, some of the performances, but, like, yeah, the later scenes, like, where he's going to the church, and he's, like, sweating, and he's, like, panicking about being near the church, and, like, the way the music builds up and the tension in the car, and she's like, Damien, what's wrong with you? And he's like starting to like freak out, and you're like, how did they get him to do that? He's like brilliant in it, I think.
I know. Yeah, because, you know, you think about like creepy kids in cinema, and there's a lot of kids that definitely in horror movies that go the extra mile to be like super creepy. But what I actually appreciate about his performance is it is surprisingly subtle, where like he does have like an innocence to him in a lot of places where, you know, he's waving at the dog and yeah, it's creepy, but it's also like, oh, it's a puppy, you know, and there's that kind of that pull where it's I don't think the kid necessarily knows what he's doing, and he is presented with situations that are horrifying, and he is like, what is even happening? Like when he hits his mom's, the bench that his mom's standing on, she falls over the side. Afterwards, he's like, what is happening? He just takes off running because he can't deal with it. There's like, he's not like, he doesn't come across as like this malevolent being until the very end of the film. He has like this innocence to him that makes it more kind of horrifying, really.
And I was thinking about that a lot. Like when this kid is the Antichrist, and he doesn't really know what's going on, but it's like when he turned 6, something like awakened in his brain. So like I was just like, I had an edible when I watched this, so I was thinking very hard about this kid's. Well, I was just like so fascinated by like what is this kid going through like emotionally? Because I'm just so curious. Like obviously it's not his perspective, but I was so curious. And my also funny thought is, why does the devil always dump his son on other people to raise his kid? I was just like, how rude, just dumping this kid on someone else to raise until he is the full-on Antichrist. But that was just a silly thought I had. But
yeah, I can't believe Satan's not a good dad. So weird.
Satan, that absentee father. But I was just, it's so curious, like, what Damien's experience is going through this. And, like, he obviously has, like, especially with Baylock, Mrs. Baylock, who is, like, weird from the get-go, and she just appears, and they're like...
Love her.
She's so... And in the remake, Mia Farrow plays her, and I will say, Mia Farrow is incredible as Mrs. Baylock, but also the actor who plays her in this is also just fucking creepy.
So yeah, I love her so much. We were rewatching it recently, that scene where she just arrives, and she's like, I'm the new nanny now, and you're like... All right, where? And then he's like, did you call her? She's like, no, did you? I thought you. And she's just like, I'm going up to the baby, bye. And you're like, okay, I think you really need to like background check this woman who's just like.
And then they come racing down the hallway. He's like, excuse me, Mrs. Baylock. And she's like, just dismissive. Oh, well, here's my references. And they're like, we're going to call and check these. She's like, okay, I'm going to go look at the kid now.
But like,
she just sort of dismisses them completely.
That's what I love about this movie, though, because I feel like the parents are trying to be like, this is weird. Like I feel like they automatically get weird vibes all around a little, like as everything progresses, and like I don't think they know how to process it. But the parents, I feel like, are very aware. This isn't like parents being like, what's happening? A little bit with the dad, but I feel like they get the vibes that something's weird. Like, it's just something's off.
But they do they don't they don't solve the problem.
Oh, absolutely not.
Like, I remember
absolutely not.
He's walking on the hallway and the dog is like growling at him and he's just like, we need to get rid of this dog. And she's like, sure, we'll do that. And nothing ever happens to the dog until the very end when he's like, oh yeah, the dog's gone, she finally says. But like, it's all mollifying him and no one really like does anything. Like, I'm sorry, if a nanny, I don't care if she says the agency sent me, I'll be like, where are you? How did you get here? Why are you wanting my kid? Why do you want to see my kid alone? This is all kind of creepy. And it would have been a no for me, but they're just like, oh, okay, I guess this is how things work.
Yeah, I love as well. There's that bit where she's like, Damien doesn't want to go to the church. And like the mom's just like, stop telling me not to bring my child. She's like, he won't get it. Why are you bringing him? Like, she's just like pressuring her so much. It's so funny.
And she's like, shut the fuck up. Give me my kid. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh my God.
I remember when I first saw this movie, I was probably around your age, Kate, when you saw it. Like, I think I was like 9 or 10 maybe. And I honestly, the only things, this is the first time since I originally saw it. I had not seen it in any of the intervening years. And I remember just specific things that came back to me as I was sitting down to watch this. I remember being convinced that someone I knew probably had 666 on their forehead.
Yep.
And I remember going through someone's hair being like...
I did that to myself. I looked in the mirror. I was like, am I the Antichrist?
Firmly convinced that I knew someone that had to be the Antichrist. And then I only really remember the deaths. I remember It's All For You. Mm-hmm. I remember the impaling.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It's brilliant. And then I remember the decapitation, which has not aged as well as when I remembered it as a kid.
With the head flipping, it's amazing.
It's still really cool. Like, obviously you can tell it's a fake head, but I also like love in 1976 they had such a crazy graphic like head flipping around like that, and like the bot, like it's just so fucked up.
And it's like so many angles on it. It's like it's so good.
It's so.
And then the other thing I remember as a kid was being terrified of the dog. And I've talked about this on the podcast, but I have had numerous run-ins with dogs that terrify me. And as I was rewatching this as an adult, I was like, you know what? I feel like this might be the movie that actually like instilled a fear of dogs in me, because the dog in this movie is terrifying.
He's a scary dog. Yeah,
he's absolutely terrifying. Yeah. And then there's the scene in the cemetery where they're digging up the bodies, and there is like a whole mess of them, and they descend on him, and it's very vicious, and I'm pretty sure that this movie is actually what kind of gave me my fear of dogs. And then I'd be bitten by him, and then I had a whole other reason to fear him. But I'm pretty sure this was like my initial, because I always was distrustful of dogs, especially the kind of black, kind of thick dogs, because like this dog in here terrifies me. Yeah. And it does to me today. Boy. Like it makes me anxious.
I think it kind of made me scared of Rottweilers, definitely. I think other dogs maybe not as much, but yeah, I think it definitely, for me as well. I think the things that really stuck with me from watching it when I was a kid was the idea of the photography and the deaths like being kind of foreshadowed. Oh. And then I got obsessed, like as a kid, like every photo I'd be like, oh God, am I going to die? There's some sort of like message in the photograph.
I love
watching it now. It reminds me of Final Destination.
Yes, I was thinking that. Yes, very much Final Destination. And I was like, I wonder if Final Destination took anything from this. Like, I remember this from, again, the remake was my point of reference for a while, but they are very, like, beat for beat, very similar. But in this, I just love, like, you see it slow, like, especially with the priest who gets impaled, it just gets slowly bigger and bigger. And it's just so cool. And then the journalist has that huge thing across his neck. And I just love that the devil is revealing... or something is revealing everyone's imminent death through photography. And there's something kind of cool about that. There's some kind of commentary about like photographic evidence and meta movies and all that stuff. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, no, I love that aspect of it for sure. Yeah, it was like, and it's funny you say Final Destination, because that was actually, I think, another film me and those friends we watched probably close to that time as well, I'd say, because I think Final Destination was 99, wasn't it? So I think that was like the idea of like precursor death, that like you like death was going to be coming after you. That was definitely a fear I had for a while, that I thought I was going to be like, you know, there was some sort of like message, omen of death chasing me around somewhere that I had to like figure it out. Yeah.
But I want to talk about, too, the impaling scene, because that, I think, is one of the scariest to me watching now, especially, again, Jerry Goldsmith score, absolute banger.
Beautiful.
It's fucking incredible. It won an Academy Award, which is good.
I think it was his only film he won an Oscar for, which is really cool.
That's so sad, because he is a phenomenal composer. He is actually one of my favorite composers. And I've talked about this because we've covered a number of films that he composed. And he literally is one of my favorites. And he also was sort of the soundtrack to my childhood. Like most of the movies that he composed, I'm like, I watched a shit ton as a kid. And I don't know, I always think he's like underappreciated compared to like some of his like, you know, peers with like James Horner or, you know, all of, Star Wars, John Williams?
Yes.
Yeah, like all of his like peers that were creating these massive scores for genre films or, you know, whatever the case may be. I feel like I don't think he ever got the acclaim, and unfortunately, but his scores are amazing.
Yeah, I listen to the Omen score when I'm writing. Sometimes I have like a few scores that I'll listen to when I'm writing to kind of get you in the headspace. So like there's certain projects, it's not for every project because it's like so dramatic, but it's like
it's very dramatic.
Yeah, some scenes, if you're working on them, it's like a good one to kind of get you in the headspace. But it's like the kind of main theme. Like I remember when I watched that first, I think probably when I was younger, I didn't probably realize that was like composed for the film. I kind of thought it was like some sort of choral song that like existed in the ether before that. So it was like really cool to learn that like it was made for the film.
And I love the because he wanted to take the kind of idea of like Ave Maria or like, you know, because it's Ave Santani, I think. And he wanted to take this sort of like choir song that's like maybe sung in church and just pervert it. And so like the English translations were, we drink the blood, we eat the body, raise the body of Satan, hail, hail, antichrist, hail Satan.
Whoa.
Those are the words that are being spoken in Latin on that song. And so he takes it and he makes it just so like creepy, and then he twists the lyrics around that you would normally hear in like a church for God or whatever. And I think it's so fascinating.
Won a fucking Academy Award. I was gonna say, that fucking won an Academy Award and got nominated. Like, that's incredible that fucking song.
Nominated for Best Original Song. When is, you know, you think about like the songs that are being nominated for Best Original Song for Academies, and it's always like people singing, and it's always, you know, this sort of happy kind of, right. And this song was nominated for Best Original Song, and I love that.
It's so good. Oh,
that's so funny, actually, now that you think about it. It's like literally like, hail Satan, eat the blood, and you're like, oh yeah.
You're like, hell yeah.
Can you imagine, like, if I don't know how the Academies were aired at that point. I don't know if they like did performances, but can you imagine if like this song today, if, you know, it's like we have we don't talk about Bruno, we have all these like cutesy songs, and it's like like this sort of like choir song. It's literally like Hail Satan. Like, can you imagine that playing on television?
I want it so badly. That would be incredible. Like, everyone's singing, like, also, like, Hereditary, like, Colin Stetson's fucking score comes in with, like, scary, like, saxophone.
Oh, I love it.
But with the impalement, I think that is so fucking scary because he's at the church. And you're like, oh, yeah, he sees it in the distance after telling Robert. I was like, what the fuck is his name? About his wife being pregnant. And he's like, the wind picks up and you're like, ooh, something spooky. He sees the church and it's like, oh, cool, I have sanctuary. And then it's like, every door is locked. And it's just like this thing like, oh, no, not even God can save you. And then he dies by getting impaled by a spire? Like, what? Is it the angels?
Spire, I would say, yeah.
Some kind of pole or weird thing. And it's just like, I feel like that is such like a nail in the coffin with this movie of like, and it's terrifying, especially if you're like Catholic, like there is no saving you from what is happening. And that's a terrifying prospect. And again, in the 70s, especially after like The Exorcist happened, and it's like, the church can save you. And in this, it's like, oh no, like there is absolutely nothing you can do. And that is so fucking scary.
Yeah, I think the idea that like, because you see it happening in the photos, so it's like, no, this is your destiny. Like that's your, this is going to happen to you. You can't really avoid it no matter what you do, is kind of like a terrifying thought in general to have.
Well, and then they go to the cemetery and they see his baby with the skull bashed in.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is such, it's like the inevitability of everything. And it's, again, like makes me think of Hereditary, which has that kind of like inevitability as like you kind of rewatch it, you kind of see like everything was predestined.
Yeah.
And that's and like in this movie, it's like, yeah, there was nothing you could have done to escape that. And that is just like, that scares me more than anything. Like it sticks in my head with horror movies, like not necessarily like terrified, but like existential dread of just being like predestined to go through this hell, and there's no matter what you do and how much effort you put in, like you cannot escape it. And that, I think, like that nihilism is pretty fucking terrifying and harrowing the more you think about it.
Yeah, because even the ending of the film is like, you know, Gregory Peck tries his best to like kill the Antichrist, and then it's like the end scene at the funeral, and you're just like, nope, there he is. Damien's still going. He's
his
like,
hat.
There's no stopping him. Just like, you know, you kind of were like, oh God, yeah, the nihilistic kind of like, yeah, you can't, Satan is going to do this no matter what, basically.
Yeah, and there's two things I definitely want to piggyback off that. The first one is that I guess originally there was some concern about having Gregory Peck as the main character, because you can't have Atticus, you know, Atticus Finch killing kids. And there was like some concern about that, because he was Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. He was sort of like, you know, the father that everyone wanted to have, and here he is killing his son, or trying to at least. But also, the one thing I do feel that this movie, in some ways, feels almost like a reaction to The Exorcist, because The Exorcist, like, you know, it's all about Catholicism's going to win. You know, it's the priests that come in, they save the day, they self-sacrifice to defeat the devil or whatever. Whereas here, it's like the priests are either looked at as being kind of insane, because the priest that is trying to get Thorne's, you know, attention, he's like, you're a little aggressive.
Well, and then you go to his fucking bedroom that's covered in Bible pages and 47 crucifixes and like an obsessive journal. It's like,
get a hobby, dude. Like, what?
And then when they go to get like the knives to kill, and there's the priest that has one good eye and his face is burned because he was in a fire. Like there's aspects of it that like it's almost like the way that people are fallible in the world, and that's not going to protect you against Satan. And it ends up being, you know, Gregory Peck's character who tries to do it. It's not a priest, it's not someone else. They're like, you have to do this, it's all on you. Like we're tapping out. It almost gets like the vibe. And then again, he loses, he dies, and the Antichrist wins. And I think that is such a, watching it after watching like The Exorcist, it's such a different feel to the film. And then like that sort of yay go God, yay go religion of The Exorcist.
I have something very controversial yet brave to say here. I almost like this more than The Exorcist. Almost. Not totally. But I think this is such a more subversive film. And like for the ways we're talking about it, like it's so nihilistic. It isn't like Catholic. I feel like The Exorcist is terrifying. Like that movie still scares me. But I think there is this like Catholic superhero movie going on there. And then as someone who loves more nihilistic films, I think The Omen is, like you said, Terry, such a good reaction to it and like such a good interpretation. And then also like, I just think it's so much more subversive in like what it's showing and how it's treating religion. But then also like talking about abortion very openly, about Kathy wanting to get an abortion. Like, I don't want a kid. And like, again, a mother saying this very openly in a movie, like, I don't want this kid that I'm pregnant with. I want to get an abortion. And the psychiatrist, like, kind of corroborating that, I think is so fascinating that those conversations are very openly happening, and how abortion, you know, in the Catholic Church is like a grave, like you're not supposed to, obviously, like a grave sin. And I just think this movie is tackling things in such a different way than we typically see, especially from that time period with religious horror. And I think I just am so into how different it is. And I don't know. I think, again, I love The Exorcist. I am not knocking The Exorcist, but I think The Omen deserves as many flowers in my head. Like, yeah, it's a little campy, but I think it really fucking goes for the gold with this. Like, impalements, and she falls to her, not death, but like almost fall, and it's like a tiny kid, and there's no saving the kid. And I don't know. I just, watching it this time, I just have such a deeper appreciation for it and what it accomplishes and how controversial it is, especially in the time period. I keep saying that, but like, again, it's just really interesting to see this kind of movie being made in that time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, as young kind of Catholic kids, I think watching it really kind of like affected us in that way. It was like, it felt very kind of like taboo in like the other ways, not just a kind of like the devil or like, you know, the deaths or kind of the gruesome stuff, but the like, yeah, the kind of like themes it's tackling. Definitely it felt kind of like taboo to be watching as a like young Catholic kid. You're like, oh, we're not meant to say that stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when I'm preparing for a podcast interview, I end up going down rabbit holes, and I went down a rabbit hole on this movie because on the Wikipedia page there was like this whole section about analysis where the American scholar Brad Duran was arguing that The Omen was part of a trend of films featuring cosmic horror that started with Rosemary's Baby, and he said, but what's interesting is that this movie concerned the first steps of the apocalypse as the Antichrist was born, which also reflected the zeitgeist of the time of 1970s. There was this book that was released in the beginning of the 70s called The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. And it is a book about how the Antichrist would be born in the 70s and the rapture would be in the 80s. And it was a hugely popular book that sold a lot of copies and continued to sell copies even after the rapture didn't happen in the 80s. But it's kind of set the scene in the early 70s for this sort of like, we are living in the end times motif that I feel like over the last 40 years, we continue to see pop up, like the 2012, like all this stuff. People saying that Obama was the sign of the Antichrist. Like everyone seems to think that we are living in the end, and they're waiting for that 7-year period of turmoil and strife that's going to cause the end of the world. And it in a way started in the 70s. And when I was digging into it, it almost sounded as if The Omen kind of brought the idea of the 666 into popular culture. Oh. And in a way, it's after this that people started talking about the fact that, like, I guess like Duran went into this whole thing about how in the Bible, it doesn't necessarily say that the Antichrist is Satan's son. And yet this movie kind of has imprinted that. And from here on out, everyone believes the Antichrist is Satan's son. Oh. When I guess if you go back to the Bible, it doesn't say that. And then the whole passage that the priest, that poem the priest reads that he says is from Revelation, isn't even in the book. Like there's a lot of things that this does and set, and I think kind of influence popular culture and influence the way people view it. And then I went down this whole rabbit hole about the Mark of the Beast, because apparently, anytime someone has wanted to do something new, a lot of evangelicals believe that it is the devil trying to put 666 in the Mark of the Beast into someone. So the barcode, when it was first introduced, they said a lot of people said that was the devil imprinting 666 in a barcode. You would have to buy things and it would be imprinting that sign in you. When in the early 2000s. When they first started doing the microchips you could implant in your skin to like pay for things, they were saying, no, that microchip is giving you the mark of the devil inside of you. Back when COVID was happening and no one wanted to take the vaccines, one of the things that came across is that in that vaccine is the mark of the devil.
Yeah. I didn't even hear that. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, I saw people talking about it online. I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah.
This idea of 666, the mark of the beast, and all of the kind of like concern, like I'm looking at these Wired articles from early 2000s talking about how Cash being skin deep, where this Florida company wanted to do a biochip, and people saying that no, that biochip is the mark of the devil. It is 666 in there, and it's the devil trying to imprint on you. Like, this idea of anything new technology from the late 70s and into today about being imprinted with the chip is all in some way or not influenced by the 70s and influenced by the Omen in a lot of ways.
Gas.
And I think that is so fascinating.
Holy shit.
That's kind of
I didn't know
crazy. Very impactful movie then, in weird ways.
It was a hugely popular movie. It made a lot of
Yeah.
money. It was the sixth most highest grossing movie of 1976. They did a whole lot of marketing on it. The Seltzer, the guy that wrote the script, he wrote a novelization that was used as sort of marketing into the film. They went all out, and this movie made a ton of money because of that. And I honestly think that it imprinted a whole lot in society, and that is, I always find that fascinating.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's very fascinating. I think as well, like, people are always kind of obsessed with the end of the world, aren't they? They're kind of like, still now. It's like, I saw a really funny, my friend sent me, like, this like kind of crazy person on Twitter had this, basically a tweet that was like, there was like an old meme that was like, things that will happen if gay marriage is legalized. And then it was like a joke that, like, you know, a plague, you know, all this kind of stuff. And then the person was tweeting, be like, well, we're not laughing now, are we? Look what happened. It's like gay marriage brought COVID and like World War III and all this kind of stuff. It's like, it did happen. I was like, okay.
Oh, Lord.
That's incredible.
That's ridiculous.
I know.
It's so funny though how people are able to take events and kind of create their own narrative around it.
Yeah.
And like the barcodes.
Yeah.
Print of the devil.
I mean, to be fair, I probably wouldn't want a microchip in my arm to pay for stuff, but not because of the devil, just because that would be kind of weird.
Just like the principle of it all.
Yeah. Capitalist chip in my arm is like, doesn't really sound good.
Okay, that's
I am
fair.
literally a cog in the. Well, I'm already a cog in the capitalist machine, but even
We
more
are,
so
yeah.
with the chip in your arm.
Yeah, it feels a bit off. Yeah, defo.
So watching this now, Vice, watching it as a kid, this movie still scare you as it did when you were a kid?
I don't think it did scare me when I rewatched it recently, but it definitely, you know, I think as a kid it scared me a lot, but it kind of thrilled me a lot, and like it kind of, you know, really gripped me as a kid, and like I found it really kind of exciting to view, and I feel like I still felt that watching it when I rewatched it recently. I was like, this is a badass movie. Like, they really could just go for it. It's just like a real thrill ride. You never feel like you're kind of, there's slow parts that much. It's just kind of like, nope, and now somebody's getting impaled and they're throwing them out the window of the hospital, and you're like, whoa, okay, here we go. So yeah,
It's paced really well for a 2-hour movie.
yeah, it was much
really
longer
is.
than I thought. I remembered it being, which is funny because as a kid, you imagine your attention span is kind of lacking, but we obviously were just like so invested in it. We were like, we don't care, we'll watch this. It's gonna be brilliant. Yeah.
All right, Terry, how many It's All For You Damiens out of 5 do you give The Omen?
It's all for you if you really want it. I'm sorry, I have Janet Jackson stuck in my head ever since I started watching this movie again. Oh man, okay. I think when I went to go add this to my letterbox, I had apparently rated it at one point and I'd given it 3 stars out of 5. And, you know, watching it this time, I think I appreciated a lot more of what it was doing. I think a lot of it is immensely silly and it is a little overdramatic in spots.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of works for it as opposed to against it in a lot of ways. And I appreciated some of the more campier aspects of it now as an adult. And I think that, like you said, Mary Beth, I think it's surprisingly subversive, particularly coming out of, you know, a few years later after The Exorcist. And I think it kind of tapped into that cultural zeitgeist of the time. And I think it's, I don't know, I think it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it on this rewatch. So I'm going to give it 4 It's All For You Damiens out of 5. What about you, Mary Beth?
I am going to give it 4.5. It's all for you, and then it's all for, so you have the half. I did remember. I was telling Terry before. I'm telling this now before I forget. My cat's name is Tiramisu, and I call her Shmoo. So I started singing "It's All for Shmoo" at her last night.
How did she react to that?
She stared at me. She's
like,
the
Mom,
Antichrist.
what are you talking about?
She's like, who? But I love this movie. I just was so obsessed with it watching it last night, and I think it's just what I want. Like, I love The Exorcist, but I love how just absolutely, like, you cannot escape this movie is, and nihilistic, and I love that it just absolutely goes for it. Like, it's got campy moments, but I love that. Like, it kicks Gregory Peck's ass. Like, he is getting mauled by dogs, stuck on a fence. Like, I love a movie where a protagonist is getting their ass absolutely kicked. Like, no one is safe, and no one is safe in this movie. And I just think there's so much happening, and I love every second of it. It all just comes together into this really dark package. And so I give it 4.5. Kate, you have the final word. How many It's All For You, Damians, do you give?
I think I will have to give it 4. It's All For You, Damians. I think, like, when I went to rewatch it, I kind of didn't think that I would enjoy it as much as I did, because sometimes when you're a kid, you're blown away by movies, but then you go back to visit them and you're a bit like, oh yeah, it's kind of silly, and there's like head spinning and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I just enjoyed it so much. I think there are really weird, unsettling things in it. Like, I think even watching it back when I was a kid, I kind of just accepted that when they dig up the grave, it's like a jackal body that gave birth to Damien.
Oh, yeah.
But now, watching it now, I was like, God, that's really fucking weird, actually, now that you, like, think about, like, a jackal giving birth.
You're like, why did they have that in the hospital?
I was like, yeah, there was, like, some bits where I was like, that's actually kind of really weird and disturbing in a way that I didn't really appreciate as much maybe when I was younger. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think the score is just so banging. It's just like such a, from the get-go moment it starts, it's like that coming in and you're just like, you can't deny it. So badass. And then, like, Gregory Peck, obviously amazing. And, like, I think the campiness of it, I really appreciated it rewatching now. Like, the kind of, like, camp nanny who's, like, got her eye makeup and she's like, well, I don't think you should go to the church. And you're like, okay, what's going on with you? You're kind of weird.
And her, like, strategically curled bangs, like, very, like, the frame her forehead.
I like that a lot. Yeah, I think, what would you do? So what if you petted your cat and your cat had the mark of the beast? What would you do?
Yeah, what would you do, Mary Beth?
I think I would willingly become a servant of Satan. I'm not gonna lie to you. I love her so much. I would do anything for that fucking cat. I'd be like, well, she likes me, so, like, obviously I'm on her good side. So I'll just be a servant of Satan. That's probably not the answer most people want to hear, but I'd do it.
Yeah, I think I have 2 cats, and I feel like if one of them was, I'd be like, well, I am just the caretaker of Satan now, I suppose.
Yeah.
Like, that's my life now.
I'll be Mrs. Baylock. Fuck it. I've got bangs already. I'll just curl each individual part.
Curl them nicely.
Yeah. I can do it.
When my cat was alive, she loved me, but she did not like anyone else. And, like, if I had discovered 666 on her, I'd be like, well, that makes sense.
that tracks.
Like, this tracks out. Yep. Hail Satan.
Yeah, one of my cats, he bites everybody except me. And I'm like, oh, yeah, he would be him. Uh-huh. He would definitely have it. Yeah.
Yep. That was my Shadow baby. She did not like anyone, and she did not like anyone else being around me. Like, she would give death stares and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it tracks.
Wait, what if you're the Antichrist and she's Mrs. Baylock, and she was Mrs. Baylock and was trying to protect you from everyone?
Yeah, she's like my Rottweiler. She was as big as one. She was a Maine Coon. She was like a 25-pound cat. She was a chunky lass. I loved her.
A chunky lass.
Yeah.
A chunky lass.
Oh, man. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for joining us to talk about The Omen. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up that you can share or talk about?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, I suppose, but I do just kind of talk about cats and horror movies. Like, weird.
That's all I do on Twitter.
That's like my, like, Venn diagram of perfection right there.
So that's on my Twitter handle is at Kate Dolan. Actually, it's CAAT Dolan. So you can find me there. I'm currently like working on writing some new projects, horror movies. So hopefully that won't be too far in the distance in the future to get to make those. And then, yeah, obviously you can watch You Are Not My Mother on streaming. It's on like kind of YouTube to rent and iTunes, all that kind of stuff. So if you do want to watch the movie, you can rent it, and now it's available.
Do it. Everyone watch it.
And I think we now need like a cat version of the Omen. That's what I'm leaving this conversation thinking.
I think that'd make a perfect TikTok.
Oh my god. Now I'm gonna take the Jerry Goldsmith score, and just like film my cat being a little shit. Like her attacking my other older cat, because she's tiny. She's like she's almost 2, and then my other cat's 13. So they just harass. Like she is always in his business.
Love it.
But listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with The Omen? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or reach out to us directly on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm Michaela Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.